This is the 8th talk in a series, and it differs from the preceding 7. In the preceding 7, I laid out the most cognitive portions of my work, and in terms of its framework, I began by talking about the different ways that schematic systems that language has for structuring conceptual content. And one of them was configurational structure, which is the delineations in space and time and other dimensions that the closed class forms of language can structure. Well, today's talk will fit into that. It's all about events of motion, which is space and time. But for the first time, I'm going to focus on what's the difference between what's universal and what's typological or language particular. Everything up to this point has been more or less universal. There have been fundamental structuring properties of language. Today I'm going to focus on both what's universal, but in particular the ways in which languages differ from each other in how they represent things, and in particular how they express events of motion. So there'll be a lot of stress on language differences, and also what some languages do uniquely in a distinctive way. So the emphasis is on how the wonderment of how different languages could be from each other. So an event of motion, as I characterize it, is the event of motion proper consists of 4 components. One is the figure, the thing that's moving or located. And for me, when I say an event of motion, and I write it with a capital M, I mean either motion or stationariness, either one. So the figure is the thing that's moving or located, often represented by a subject noun, let's say. The next component is the state of motion. So it has 2 possibilities: either move, written in capital letters, or be located, capital B with subscript lock. And then there's the component of path, which is if it's motion, it's path, and if it's locative, it's the site that the figure occupies with respect to the ground. And so the ground is the 4th component. It's the reference object with respect to which the figure's path or site is located. And then that's the core of the motion event proper. But most languages habitually express that core event of motion together with what I call a co-event, which relates to the main motion event, typically as its cause or as its manner. But there's actually a whole range: its precursor, its subsequence, and so forth. So that's the basic event of motion. And that's what's universal. That formula there is what's universal about representing an event of motion. Everything else is going to be typological, and there's this particular typology is based on what a language or a language family characteristically shows, which of these components at the semantic level it shows in the verb. So the basic methodology is to look across different languages and see what semantic components characteristically show up in one or another kind of morphosyntactic component. That's the methodology. And we find that they're different. Different languages characteristically put different components in different morphosyntactic categories, like in the verb. They put different things in there. And so the methodology is to observe this, look for any patterns that arise, and then look for any cross-linguistic differences and see what patterns can be observed about that. So that's the technique. So the rest is to go through I'll start with three of the main typological categories of languages around the world. And they differ, in this particular typology, they differ by what shows up in the verb. The verb, or verb root, always has the fact of motion in it. It's always got the move or the be located in it. In addition, it typically has one other semantic component from this motion event. In the first typological category I'll look at, which includes English, and in fact it includes most Indo-European languages except Romance. It includes Finno-Ugric. It includes Chinese, although you're welcome to dispute this with me, but that's my current thought about the matter. It includes several other smaller languages. And its characteristic pattern is that in the verb or verb root, it has typically the fact of motion together with the co-event. So that you have a series of, and the co-event can be, as I said, something which is either its cause or its manner. So you typically have a set of verbs in these languages which indicate something moving in one or another manner or due to one or another cause. Many verbs like that. So English's characteristic is a perfect example of the type, and I'll illustrate it with English. So first, let's since it covers both stationariness and motion, let me first give some stationary examples. And these would be like be located things. So I'll give a series of examples of the way you normally say them in their conflated form, where the two parts of the sentence are analyzed, are expressed together, and then in their unconflated form. So something like the lamp lay on the table, let's say, should be properly analyzed in this more analytic way as the lamp was located on the table. So that's the motion event proper, in this case in its stationary form, with the manner of the lamp was lying. And then you typically move the manner verb, this co-event verb, which is in a relationship of manner, to where the move is, to where the be located is. So be located while lying comes out as to lie in English. So the manner, the lamp lay on the table, or it could have been stand while standing. So be located while standing is to stand. This is not terribly convincing, but it looks better if you take the next example. The rope hung across the canyon from two hooks. Here, if you try and tease apart the two elements, the motion event proper, that is the stationary version of it, would be something like the rope was located across the canyon, or you might want to say extended across the canyon, with the manner of it hung from two hooks. That's the manner, it hung from two hooks. And then again, you can take the hang part, move it over, and conflate it, and you wind up with a sentence like, it was located while hanging, and you wind up with a surface verb, hung. So the rope hung across the canyon from two hooks. It's the fact that you've got across the canyon and from two hooks, these two separate phrases, that make you think that you've got two separate semantic components that they are in construction with. And that is, in fact, my analysis. The across the canyon part is in construction with the underlying semantic component was located or extended across the canyon. Whereas the from two hooks is in construction with the hang part, the hanging part. Okay, so let's go to, so that's the only stationary example I give. Let's go to some motion examples. And these will be non-agentive, no agent in sight. So you'll just have the figure in the ground and so forth. And let's first consider the case where the relation of the co-event is one of manner. So you have things like the rock slid down the hill, the rock rolled down the hill, the rock bounced down the hill, the rock slid down the hill. And the way I'm going to analyze it is the motion event proper is the rock moved down the hill. So the down the hill part, which is a kind of motion phrase, a prepositional phrase, goes with the semantic component of move in capital letters. That is sort of like a basic, in fact, universal semantic concept. So the rock moved on the hill with the manner of the rock was bouncing, or the rock was rolling, or the rock was sliding. And then once again, in the English manner, you take the manner verb from the co-event, move it over. I mean, I'm just expressing it that way. It doesn't mean it actually happens cognitively that way, or any process actually occurs like that, but it's just to think of it diagrammatically. It's as if the co-event verb moves over, conflates with the move verb in capital letters, and you get a new verb, something like the rock rolled down the hill. The next example in the normal surface pattern is the gate swung shut on its rusty hinges. Well, I would suggest that this comes from something like the gate moved shut. And shut doesn't have to be a verb in English. It can also be what I'm calling a satellite, which is not a preposition. It's a satellite, or a verb particle, it's been called traditionally. And so it's as if it came from the gate moved shut, where shut means to a position across an aperture, across an opening. And then with the manner of, the gate swung on its rusty hinges, or the gate creaked on its rusty hinges. So that's the co-event. And again, you could take the verb from there, conflate it with move, and you get a surface sentence like, the gate swung shut on its rusty hinges, or the gate creaked shut on its rusty hinges. And again, the on its rusty hinges is a phrase in the final sentence that semantically goes with just a portion of the surface verb, creaked, which is, or swung, which is it's swung on its hinges. That's the logical correlation. It's swung on its rusty hinges. Whereas the shut part, meaning which is a conflation itself of to across an opening, goes with the move component. So each portion of the sentence, in effect, is in construction with, or goes with, a differentiable, an isolable, and something you can analyze out component of this conflated verb creaked or swung. Now, these have been non-agentive. Now we have agentive examples. So we can add in to the formula I gave at the outset, which just had the basic motion verb. We can embed that within a much larger matrix thing, which includes an agent. So I agented that, and then this basic motion verb. And my symbolization for that is I have a capital A as a subscript in front of the move. So move, all caps, M-O-V-E, with preceded by a capital A, is I agentively moved. Somebody agentively moved it. And it's itself a conflation of to agented that something move. So I agentively moved the keg into the storeroom, which means I agentively caused it that the keg move into the storeroom, with the manner of the keg rolled. We're still with manner, no cause yet. We're still with manner. So, and that comes out as I rolled the keg into the storeroom, or I bounced the keg into the storeroom, or I slid the keg into the storeroom. So this is now with an agent, a whole agentive complex added on top of the the basic motion event. The figure is now, the figure, which is the keg, now shows up as direct object, and the agent shows up as subject, so it's kind of been demoted. I twisted the cork out of the bottle, or I popped the cork out of the bottle. This is, again, I moved the cork out of the bottle agentively with the manner of the cork twisted, or I twisted the cork, which either one, or the cork popped. So this means, and then you wind up with I popped the cork out of the bottle, like that, or I twisted the cork out of the bottle. It gives you the manner in which you removed it from the bottle. Now we switch to where the relation of the co-event is one of cause rather than one of manner. So far they've been all manner. So now let's switch to the case where it's one of cause. And let's go back to the case where there's no agent, so that the subject is going to be the figure. So now all of a sudden we have sentences like, the napkin blew off the table. And this I derive from the napkin moved off the table, just plain move in this case, the basic motion concept, with the cause of, now it's not with the manner of, but with the cause of, something blew on the napkin, like a gust of air. And then again, you sort of take, it's as if you took the blow part and conflated on the move part, and you get the napkin blew off the table. Similarly, the bone pulled loose from its socket. That's the bone moved loose from its socket. Loose is here another one of those satellites, path satellites that English has many of. And so it moved to a state of being loose from its socket, moved out of its socket, with the cause of something pulled on the bone, and the result is the bone pulled loose from its socket. And this is all taking place without any overtly mentioned agent. I mean, there may be no agent around. There isn't in the case of the wind example. Then we can now add an agent again, and we have the same keg, but before, whereas you said I rolled the keg in, you can now see I kicked the keg into the storeroom. This is where now I agentively moved the keg into the storeroom with the cause of I kicked the keg. And the difference in how you know which category it's to belong to is which object manifested the basic meaning of the verb. If the verb is rolling, like I rolled the keg into the storeroom, well, I didn't roll. I mean, I didn't roll over and over. The keg did. So that's what I'm going to call it manner, is I moved the keg into the storeroom with the manner of the keg rolled. But in I kicked the keg into the storeroom, now it's I whom doing the kicking. It's not the keg that's doing the kicking. So here's the keg, like a barrel. I kick it, and it rolls into the storeroom. It's either onset kicking or extended kicking. Or similarly, I pushed the keg into the storeroom. Okay, so those are, and other examples of that are what? I chopped the tree down to the ground at its base. Well, okay, here's a tree, and here again we can see which sentence fragment goes with which component of the verb. I chopped the tree down at the base. I say comes from, I agentively moved the tree down to the ground. So that those parts, all the down to the ground, goes with this move portion. With the cause of, I chopped on the tree at its base. In English here puts an on in there. I chopped on the tree. If you do something extendedly, like I chop on the tree, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything actually happened. You just repeatedly swinging the axe into the tree. Same with I pushed on this table. It doesn't mean the table moved. So that's the co-event. And again, if you put the chop part, I guess you leave the on out there. I mean, you let it drop and then move it over, and you get I chopped the tree down to the ground at its base. Well, the chopping part goes with at its base. That's where you're chopping it. So again, each fragment of the sentence goes with a different component of the main verb, and that's part of my motivation for analyzing these verbs as having separate semantic components, each within its own separate clause. There's also self-agentive. I don't know if I skipped it at some point, but anyway, there's self-agentive, which is things like I ran down the stairs. That would come from I went down the stairs with the manner of I was running. I was running. And this is from a verb to go, which is itself derivative, a capital G-O. It's a derivative from I caused my body to move, agentively caused my body to move. All that collapses into this go verb in my analysis, and which in turn can serve as a base onto which a co-event can conflate. So once again, you get I ran down the stairs, I limped down the stairs, whatever, I slid down the stairs. So those are the self-agentive types. That's the first pass through the English type, and in principle, this is going to be what most of Indo-European does, except for Romance. I can ask you if this is mostly what Chinese does. It's mostly what Finno-Ugric does, and so forth. And it's one of the main patterns for representing motion, what happens in the verb in the world. And when I say characteristic, by the way, I say it's what characteristically shows up in the verb. I mean, it's the most colloquial pattern. It's the most preponderant pattern. It's the pattern which shows up across most different kinds of semantic categories. So that's what I mean by characteristic. Every language does exhibit alternative patterns, but this is the most characteristic one for English and maybe for Chinese. Now we switch to another pattern, which I suspect is, in fact, the most common one in the world. And it's where what shows up in the verb, together with the fact of motion, is the path. So these kinds of languages have all sorts of surface verbs which mean things like to go along one or another path. And the languages for which this is the characteristic type include Romance languages, meaning those that developed from Latin. Latin itself was an English type pattern, but it underwent a typological shift and gave rise to Romance, such as Spanish. It's characteristic of Semitic languages, Polynesian languages, Japanese, Korean, and a number of American Indian languages, such as Nez Perce and Caddo. And Spanish is a perfect example of the type. And in this language, we expect Spanish to say things that, in other words, to a speaker of English, or perhaps Chinese, what could be more natural than saying a sentence like, the bottle floated into the cave? How else could you say it? Here's a cave, here's water, here's a bottle, the bottle floated into the cave. How else could you possibly say it? Well, it turns out that in a Spanish type language, which includes then Japanese and Korean, you can't say it that way. It's impossible. There's no way in the language to say it that way. Instead, you have to say something like, the bottle entered the cave floating, which is in fact how Spanish says it. You say, la botella, my Spanish accent is not great, la botella entró a la cueva flotando. The bottle entered to the cave floating. Or you can put the flotando after entró. You can say, la botella entró flotando a la cueva. So if you tried to say something like the bottle floated into the cave, well, first of all, Spanish has no word like into. If you tried saying something like la botella flotó en la cueva, it would only mean that here's the cave, the bottle's already inside, and it's just floating there. That's all. So there's no way to say it like English. And so all the kinds of path directions that English would express with a satellite, and I'll get to that later, like the bottle floated into the cave, out of the cave, past the island, through the tube, all that kind of stuff. Spanish is instead going to express with separate verbs. I call them path verbs. And Japanese also has them. It turns out Chinese also has them, and you can use them as path verbs as the main verb of the sentence, but apparently most characteristically these days, that was true for classical Chinese. These days you typically use your path verbs as a second verb, a second verbal element, which I'm also going to call a satellite. And so you would say things like, instead, the bottle floated in, or bottle float enter, where the enter is coming more and more to resemble a path satellite like English in. This is me talking, you can disagree with me. So Spanish has not only the bottle entered the cave floating, but also the bottle exited the cave floating, it means moved out, salió de la cueva. And the bottle passed the rock, pasó por la piedra, and the bottle, there's no English word for it, traversed, I guess, the tube. Again, it's pasar in Spanish. Pasó por el tubo means moved through. Or the balloon moved up, ascended through the chimney. You'd have to say, el globo subió por la chimenea flotando. Or the bottle the balloon floated down the chimney. It's pasó bajo flotando por la chimenea. The bottle floated around the island. In Spanish, it's an idiom, le dio vuelta, gave turn to the island, but still the path is expressed in the verb. The bottle crossed the canal. Here's a canal. Floated. English would say floated across the canal. Spanish says the bottle crossed the canal floating. Cruzó el canal flotando. The bottle floated away from the bank. Is se fue de la orilla. The bottle floated back to the bank, returned. You'd have to say the bottle returned to the bank, volvió a la orilla. The two bottles floated apart, se separaron flotando. The two bottles floated together, se juntaron flotando. They separated, they joined floating. You even have it for notions of along and all about. So the bottle floated along the canal. It's iba flotando. There's a verb for it, to move along. And the bottle floated all about the canal. It's andaba en el canal flotando, or por el canal flotando. You have, and then you have all the same kinds of things with an agent. All this has been without an agent, so you have agentive counterparts of this. Usually it's separate verbs, whereas English type languages keep the path indicator in the satellite the same, whether it's with an agent or without an agent. So the barrel rolled in, I kicked the barrel in, it's still in. But Spanish, since it's putting its path in its verbs, it often has distinctive, and so does Japanese, have distinctive causative counterparts for the same path. So instead of entrar, which is non-agentive, a figure moves in, like the bottle entered the cave. then all of a sudden, if it's agentive, now you have to switch to another verb, meter. So like I inserted the keg into the pantry with a kick is meti. El barril en la bodega de un, what is it, pedazo, I guess, with a kick. So that's how they wind up saying that. I should say that given that the verb is now occupied by the path and cannot express the manner or the cause as it did, as the English verb did, now manner or cause has to be expressed elsewhere in the sentence. So, and you often do that with some kind of gerundive type of expression like flotando, floating, or with a prepositional phrase like de un pedazo with a kick. So let's see. That's cause to enter. There's also cause to exit, to extrude the barrel from the, or what do I have, the barrel from the storeroom or whatever. Anyway, it's sacar. And you would have other examples. Oh yeah, with an agent, I felled the tree with an axe. Where English would say I chopped the tree down, Spanish says I caused to fall. I felled the tree by chopping on it, or with an axe, or with chop blows. So again, you have to say tumbé el árbol. That's what the main verb is. And then you have to express the cause elsewhere, like cortándolo, achándolo, chopping it, or con una hacha, with an axe, or de hachazos, with axe blows. And the same with another example would be in English you'd say I cut the wrapper off the package. In Spanish you have to say I removed the wrapper from the package. So quité el papel del paquete. I removed, specifically, remove in English is ambiguous, whether it's off a surface or out of an enclosure. Quitar is specific to off a surface. So that's, and I removed it by cutting it. And there's a whole series of put verbs which are systematized, also agentive put verbs, whereas English would have put or take, depending on the direction. So I put the figure into the ground. Spanish would say meter, the figure a the ground. Put the figure on the table. It would be poner, the figure en the table. Then I took the figure out of the ground. It would be sacar. And I took the figure off the table. It would be quitar. And put two figures together is juntar. Take two figures apart, separar. So it's an immensely consistent system. The English system is consistent. The Spanish system is consistent. Now you might be asking at this point, how come I'm able to translate a lot of these Spanish path verbs with English verbs, like exit and enter and so forth? Well, if you look at them, it turns out that almost all of these path verbs that I'm using in English to translate the Romance path verbs are, in fact, borrowed from Romance languages. They're not native Germanic words. They're not native English words. They include all these path verbs that I've been using to translate the Spanish ones in English are verbs like to enter, from Spanish or French, to exit, to ascend, to descend, to pass, to cross, all from Romance languages, to separate, to join, what else is there? To advance, to return, instead of go back, to return. They're all borrowed from Romance, where it's the native type. English does have a few path verbs, but they're rather few. There are things like rise, leave, follow. Otherwise, it's not the native type. And in fact, German doesn't even have all these Romance ones like enter, exit. German even lacks those, and we'd have a harder time translating it. If I were giving this talk in German, which I couldn't, it would have an even harder time trying to render the Spanish verbs. So type 3 is another main type. Well, it's actually quite rare. It's the type in which what is characteristically conflated in the main verb root, with the fact of motion, is the thing that's moving, the figure. So we have a whole series of verb roots, which means for one or another kind of object to move or be located. And it shows up in the American Indian language that I worked on, Atsugewi, which is a Hokan language spoken in Northern California, or that was spoken in Northern California. It's now pretty much dead. It's the main Navajo characteristic pattern, and it shows up as one of the characteristic patterns in some Mayan languages. And to give an example of how it works, in Atsugewi is a polysynthetic language, which means that it has a verb root at the center and many prefixes and suffixes. So you can hardly get away without saying, to say just anything, no matter how simple. You've got to put in a lot of prefixes and suffixes. And typically one of these polysynthetic words stands for a whole sentence. You often don't need much more in the sentence. So that's the nature of a polysynthetic. You can go for a long time in speaking one of these languages without ever using a noun, just a bunch of polysynthetic verbs. So the verb root expresses one or another, characteristically expresses one or another kind of figure, object, moving or located. English, as usual, has some examples of the type. And two examples, one non-agentive, one agentive. So the verb to rain, for it to rain, is an example of the type. So you can say in English, it rained in through the bedroom window. Well, that means that raindrops moved in through the bedroom window. But instead of having a noun subject representing the figure, it's conflated in the verb. So to rain means for rain to move. And similarly, for an agentive type, to spit is an example. It means to cause it agentively that a packet of spit move in the given direction. So you could say, I spat into the cuspidor. A cuspidor is a receptacle for spit. Those are examples of English with verbs that incorporate the figure along with the fact of motion. Well, this is what Atsugewi does as its characteristic type. It has scores or dozens of verb roots that refer to some kind of object or material as moving or as located. So, for example, lup, which these can't occur by themselves. They have to be prefixed and suffixed, but lup, lup, typically refers to a small spherical object moving or located. It could refer to hailstones. It could refer to a large round candy. It could refer to an eyeball. So if you're going to poke someone's eye out, that's the verb you'll use. That's the verb root, to cause an eyeball to move out of its socket. That's the verb root. There's a verb root, just a glottalized T, for a planar object to move or be located. Could be a sun shield on a baby's cradle board. Could be a patch on a clothing. could be a shingle on a roof. And so there's a number of these, and well, the one that I'll illustrate, well, there's another one, the one that I'll illustrate right now is stuck. Stuck means for runny, icky material to move or be located. It could be guts, intestines. It could be rotten tomatoes, chewing gum, runny mud, stuff like that. So, so here's a typical kind of Atsugewi word. You would put stuck in the middle, and here's going to be a locative example. There's a suffix which means, it has to be suffixed, and giving you some kind of path plus ground together. In this case, it means on the ground. So the ikka means on the ground. And it has to take a cause prefix, which indicates the cause that gave rise to the event of the main verb root, which in this case is for icky material to be located. And the cause in this case is a prefix o, which means as a result of an object's own weight acting on it. I mean, modern times you could translate it as the result of gravity acting on it. So you'd get a verb if you add on all sorts of prefixes and suffixes, which you need for person and tense and mood and voice and evidentials, you wind up with something like Ostaqika means literally runny icky material is located on the ground as the result of its own weight acting on it, but it could refer to, for example, it means that generally, but it could be used if you see some guts lying on the ground, and you can say Ostaqika. Or let's take now a motion example. If you take the same verb root and you suffix it with a directional suffix meaning into liquid, it's and you put on a cause prefix which means as the result of wind blowing on it, which is ja, and you put on all these prefixes and suffixes that you need for inflections, you would get chwastaqitsta. And literally it means icky material moved into liquid as the result of the wind blowing on it. So for example, to instantiate it, that's literally what it means, but a typical application of it would be if there's a creek and there's some guts lying there and a gust of wind comes up and blows the guts into the creek, you say, chwastaqitsta. So that's the how, in one single word, how you refer to that. Or, to put on now an agentive example, there's a directional suffix which means into fire, jis, and there's a cause prefix which means by acting on it with a linear object moving axially, which is ju. And if I did it, you could say which then means I caused it that icky material moved into a fire by acting on it with a linear object that I'm moving axially. And that could mean something like I had a stick and I poked the guts or mud or whatever, rotten tomatoes, into the fire. So all that's in one word. Okay, so that's how Atsugewi does it. And it too is thoroughgoing in its type. So it doesn't just treat ordinary objects that way, it also treats body parts that way and garments that way. So for example, English treats body parts just like it treats any other object. So, so that it makes it the figure. In this case, if it's agentive, so you can say, I held my hand over the fire, and the verb is therefore going to be one of manner, or manner or cause. So I held my hand over the fire. I pulled my arm out of the cage. I laid my head on the pillow. I put my ear up against the wall. All these kinds of. It's just like any normal English sentence. In Atsugewi, it does it like any normal Atsugewi sentence. It makes the verb root the place in which you show the object that's moving. So there's a separate verb root, which means for the ear to move or be located. It's ismak. And if you put your ear up against a wall to listen to somebody in the other room, you'd say wismak iksa, or if I did wismak iksa. So it means ismak is to cause to ear move, to move one's ear, all in one root, and followed by the directional suffix, which means laterally against a vertical surface. So it's totally consistent. The same goes with garments. So, English does, by the way, have a few of these kinds of verbs, as English keeps offering examples of how other languages do it. So, for example, to step means to move the foot. So I stepped up onto the curb, means I moved my foot up onto the curb. I leaned out the window, means moved my torso. I reached toward the ceiling, means your arm. So English has a few, but that's the only Atsugewi way. Same with garments. English has a few. Normally you say, I put on a shirt, put the hat on her, that kind of thing. But we do have a few that are in the verb themselves, like I booted up, I shod the horse, put the shoes on the horse. But this is the only Atsugewi way. They have verb roots which refer to the particular garment that you're moving. Okay, so that's the third main type. Next, so these are the main characteristic ways of moving the various parts around, the various components of the otherwise universal motion event. These are the three main patterns. But you can ask, what about all the other possible patterns? So let's go systematically through them and see, well, what have the world's languages done with them? One possibility is, well, what about the ground object? Why not put the ground object in the verb together with move, and have a whole series of verbs which mean to move with respect to one or another kind of ground. And this barely exists at all. I had to scrounge to find a few English examples. The morpheme plane in the verb, in the two morpheme verb to emplane or to deplane, well, maybe you can mount an argument that would say that plane as a morpheme means to move with respect to a plane, an airplane, and that the path is now being expressed separately by separate morpheme, the prefix M or D. But this barely exists as a system at all. If any language were to have it as its characteristic system, you'd also have to have forms like to circumplane, meaning I walked around the airplane, to transplane, I walked through the airplane. And then you'd have to have things like to enhouse, meaning to walk into a house, to dehouse, to walk out of a house, to circumhouse, to walk around a house. And it doesn't exist. No language that I've ever heard of has anything like it. So the question, it's for me a mystery. I do not know why this possibility is left as an orphan. Maybe some language somewhere does have it, but it's just so far down the hierarchy. There's a kind of hierarchy. The pattern that conflates the figure, like Spanish and Japanese, seems to be the most common in the world, is just impressionistically. The pattern that conflates the co-event seems the next most common. The pattern that conflates the figure is pretty minor. It shows up in just a few languages, but it does show up in a few. Maybe there's some language somewhere that's never been recorded that does this with the ground, but it hasn't been. I see no discourse reason why it shouldn't be just as viable. But okay, you can present reasons why you would think so. The next possible, so it's a mystery. The next possible thing is for two of the universal components to show up conflated together with the fact of motion in the verb. And that does show up as various languages' minor systems, but never as the major system. So for example, English does have a minor system of move plus a certain path plus a certain ground. So for example, they're usually agentive. Well, here's a non-agentive one, to birth. Like the ship berthed in its assigned, I don't know, well, it's assigned berth. It's assigned mooring or something. It means to move into a berth. Usually they're agentive, so you'd have things like to shelve. So I shelved the books means I caused that books moved onto the shelves. And to box, I boxed the apples. I caused it that apples moved, and here it is, move into boxes. So move into boxes is to box. Cause to move into boxes is to box. There's another pattern of this sort where you have figure and move and path, but not the ground. So to dust something, to powder, she powdered her nose, means she caused that powder move onto her nose, and then you mentioned nose separately. So cause powder to move onto, and to tag a suitcase to let's say to scale a fish, to cause the scales to move off of a fish. So those patterns do exist, but no language I know of has any major system of that, possibly because it would be too costly. You'd have to have a separate lexical item for every possible combination of a relevant combination of say ground and path. For everyone you need a new lexical item, and languages are much more sparing of their lexicons than that. So, but still, I think it would have been a possibility if you'd picked as ground objects not things like boxes and shelves, but things like volumes and planes and things that are geometrically more generic. It could have been a viable system, but again, we don't find it. Fourth possibility is that nothing conflates. You just have a verb to move, which you keep using over and over again. Move, 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 move. Or biloke, biloke. And again, you don't find any language with that. Possibly the reason is that it's inefficient. You might as well use up that space, that slot, with since it's just going to be repeated over and over again, with something that's more contentful in character. So maybe that's the reason. Now, as it happens, you do have languages with this kind of system for part of their motion events. Spanish, for example, does have a single fixed verb for the be located concepts, like estar. They say over and over, estar, estar, estar. And they do not continue their normal pattern of conflating the motion component with path. Other languages do, like Halkomelem is a Canadian Indian language, And it's Sahaptin, I think. And it's otherwise like Spanish in its conflation pattern, but it is more consistent. It does have locative verbs that mean things like to be in, as one verb to be in, another verb to be on, another verb to be between, and so forth. Okay, so that's that type. Then there is a fifth type where it's something like, it's as close as languages tend to get to this last type, where they don't have just a single verb move, but mark a few distinctions, but not many. So one of the American Indian languages around Clear Lake in California, one of the Pomo languages, for example, Southwest Pomo, I guess, makes a three-way distinction of its moved verbs, sort of Atsugewi-like. It distinguishes three kinds of figures, but just three. It's if the figure is single, dual, or trial or plural. But it has nothing like Atsugewi has, where it has whole different verb roots for different kinds of objects as figures moving. Just these three. So it's pretty, and so you hear those three verb roots over and over and over and over again. So one might object it's too monotonous, but nevertheless. Okay, so that kind of thing does exist. Next we get split, and then we do get split systems. So a split system is a language which in fact has several different ones of these basic types, and Spanish is one of them. So as we already noticed, for locative things, it has one type of conflation pattern, namely zero conflation. Nothing moves in to the be located verb. For motion, it has two types. If it's the one we mainly saw, which is where the path conflates. But it does this primarily for only certain path notions, where you're crossing a boundary like into. But as Jon Askey and Dan Slobin have pointed out, if it's a kind of path which doesn't cross a boundary, then in fact you have, of all things, the English conflation pattern. So in fact, in Spanish, you would actually say he ran from his house to the school. Word for word, you'd say, run from the house to the school, or at least run to the school. So, because there is no path verb in Spanish, which is to transmove between to transmove home and school running. There's no way to say that. I'm just making this up. To transmove. So there's no such verb. Okay, so, and then finally, I might as well skip this one. There's a mixed type. Greek has a mixed type, but we can maybe skip that in the interest of time. Okay, so I've sort of, let's see, so now we're in a position to look at the type, the verb. What shows up in the verb has been the most diagnostic of the surface forms, the morphosyntactic forms, to look at to see how languages differ from each other typologically as to how they express motion events. It's been the best. But once a language puts one of the semantic components, one of the motion components, into the verb, what does it do with the rest of its components? Where do they go? Well, for this, there's a second place to look to see what happens. That's the second most diagnostic, and that's the satellite. And the satellite is, my own term, for a kind of grammatical category. It's the element which is directly in construction with the verb root. Again, we can look at the satellite as a kind of receptor constituent, just like we looked at the verb to see, okay, we can look at the verb, see what shows up in it semantically in terms of the semantic components. In English, what shows up in it is the co-event. In Spanish, it's the path, and in Atsugewi, it's the figure. So then what shows up in the satellite? Well, again, we have a range of possibilities of what's left in the of the remaining semantic components in the motion event. So let's look at English. Of the semantic of the motion event semantically, the co-event is already accounted for, showing up in the verb. Okay, well, what shows up in the satellite? Well, it's the path. In fact, more specifically in English, it's the combination of the satellite, which goes with the verb, and the preposition, which goes with the following noun, typically the ground noun, that together in English represent the path. So, for example, if you geometrically have an object that moves, here's an object that is it undergoes a path where first it's inside the enclosure and then it's outside. That path in English is expressed by, and I give the little formula there, it's out as a satellite to the verb, together with of as a preposition with the following noun. That combination represents that particular geometric conceptual path. So, and there's rules in English where you can't drop the out, you have to keep it. But if the following ground object, that the of goes with, if it is a deictic or an anaphor, something that you already know about, you can drop it and remove the preposition along with it. So you can say, I stood just inside the door of the house and then I ran out of it. Or you could say, given that context, you can say, I stood just inside the door and then I ran out, dropping the of it. But the out plus the of is together the satellite plus the preposition combination that represents this particular path concept. Well, so English has lots of these path satellites. They're really satellite plus preposition combinations. And I list a whole bunch of them. They're all the ones that you're probably familiar with. So I ran into the house. It's run out of the house. Then there's ran up the stairs, ran down the stairs. Just the whole list there of standard satellites, which convey this. And there's several dozen of these, I suppose. In addition, I list second some ones which are would be less likely to be included as path satellites, but which I think should be. They function perfectly the same. This is where it starts off with loose, like the what's that? Are you guys, by the way? Yeah, you have the place. I hope the bone pulled loose from its socket. So loose from is the thing that represents this particular, and free of the coin melted free of or free from the ice, either one, or clear of. It represents a specific spatial configuration. She swam clear of the oncoming ship, or just she swam clear. So here's a ship, oncoming ship. Here she is in the way. She swam this way. She swam clear of the oncoming ship. That's a particular spatial configuration. So there's a whole set of these. Froze, stuck to the window, baked fast to the enamel, to the clay, and so forth. Okay, so these are all the way that English, where it takes the path component has to be expressed somewhere and places it in the satellite plus preposition. Now, next, what Atsugewi does is it has a whole series of suffixes directly following the figure verb, which combine together path plus ground. So there's a whole, it doesn't separate those. It combines path plus ground. So there's a whole series of them that represent, some dozen or so, that together represent English into plus some kind of ground. I think I'll diagram this. If I talk like this, can you hear me? Yes. Okay. So these are all separate geometric configurations that Atsugewi is very strict on discriminating. So you have into liquid is one suffix, that's itsta. If you have into an aggregate, such as into a crowd of people, into bushes, into a deer's stomach, into a deer's rib cage, it's considered an aggregate. You use another one that's ispu. If you have into aerial enclosure, like into a corral, that's another one. Into a volumetric enclosure, or this way, either one. That's yet another one. That's ipsna. And that could cover, for example, into a room, into a deer's stomach, into an oven. Then there's another one which is into a gravitic container, such as acorns into a basket, things in your cupped hand, water in a lake basin. All of these would be gravitic container-like. There's into a fire. There's into solid substance, 3 of them in fact. One is for down into the ground, literally the ground. That's mit. There's another one which is laterally into the solid substance, like if this is a tree trunk and you swing an axe into it, that's iksa. So the verb root is snut. And if I did it by swinging, it's swosnut. And then if I did it into a tree trunk, it's swosnatiksa. And then the last one of this is down into the substance of something raised above the ground, like a tree stump. That would be jisu. So it would be swosnat, swosnat. So furthermore, there is into a corner, which is another geometric distinction. And what else? Oh yeah, over a rim and into, and that includes, for example, water pouring down into a gopher hole, or a fly flying into your mouth, because your mouth is perceived as an opening with a rim surrounding it. There's another one which is down into a pit in the ground, such as a house collapsing into the cellar, or if you dig a deep pit to trap a deer, then if the deer falls in, it goes with that one. That's tubuma. And other distinctions. There's also, into someone's face. Throw water in someone's face, that's mikka. So these are fine distinctions. These are fine distinctions that Atsugewi makes with just with the into notion, whereas English would just cover all of these grossly with just the more generic term in. And there is no in Atsugewi. It's much more finely divided, and they never make a mistake that I detected. These are just as clear to them as for distinctions as anything else. So anyway, but in any case, the point here is that they represent both path plus ground together. Let me check the time. Okay. If you close this on your thumb, it cuts it. Let's see. Another. Well, let me. Maybe I should start skipping things. Yes, I will. Let me just go to one other kind of satellite type. In fact, I will go to the Atsugewi type that expresses. Well, there are languages that have satellites that express the figure. So you may have heard of, I don't know if you're into linguistics, you may have heard of noun incorporating languages, and Kada would be an example. So you, instead of saying the cattle went into the water, or entered the water, you would say the cattle water entered. So it's again a compound verb. The main verb root is enter, but it takes a prefix which refers to water and which tells you the ground. So the cattle water entered. In fact, they even have it with is. So something can, instead of saying the house is at the wood's edge, you actually say it house is. It house bees at the wood's edge. So it's house being at the wood edge. So it's rather consistent itself in that respect. Other languages, Nez Perce expresses the manner, again with a prefix. So it has a verb root, just like Spanish, type verb roots to ascend, to descend, to cross, and it has prefixes which mean things like flying, crawling, sailing, and so forth. In fact, you can almost picture Spanish or Japanese developing into a Nez Perce type of language. As it stands, Japanese has the main path verb as the second of two verbs, like crawling, enter, which how do you say that? Well, I'm not good at Japanese, but anyway, you say crawl, enter, and enter is the how, and what's enter in Japanese? Hairu. So you could say how hairu.
Hairu.
Yeah, hairu is to enter, and you can, how is crawling, is to crawl. So you could say hairu, right? No, what's to crawl? How do you say to crawl? How?
Hairu.
So anyway, you can put the crawl verb in front. So to crawl, crawling, enter. And in the course of time, you can imagine how that might boil down into kind of like just a set of prefixes. It almost is that now, pretty much like the Nez Perce system. And I guess finally, then the Atsugewi has yet another satellite system, and that's the cause system. You already saw the cause system with some of the examples. And just to go over a few of them, they have some 24 of these cause prefixes, which mean things like as the result of an object's own weight acting on it, as the result of heat acting on it, as the result of the wind blowing on it, as a result of the rain falling on it. And then there are objects. So as the result of acting on it with a linear object moving axially, such as by prodding, poking, propping. There's another which is there's another which is as a result of a linear object moving obliquely with respect to the ground object, such as by scraping, by whittling, by pulling a canoe. And there's another which is by swinging, so that that would be like by swatting, by chopping, and so forth. And it goes, and there's a whole set that has to do with the body parts. So that's how that system works. So I think we're in a position then to look at these as kind of like a typology. Now can have the main typological system of what shows up in the verb, those three things, and the sub-categorization for each of those where the other things show up. So for the most prevalent type, where what shows up in the verb is the path, languages like Spanish basically have no satellite. A language like Nez Perce, which is like Spanish, but then it uses a satellite position to express the manner. And a language like Caddo uses the satellite position to express the figure or the ground. Then if you go to the English type, where the verb root incorporates the co-event, the manner or the cause, then the satellite is typically used to represent the path. And if you go to the Atsugewi type, where the verb is used to express the figure, the thing that's moving, then it has in fact two satellite systems, one to represent the cause and the other to represent the path plus ground together. So this is where all these subcategorizations take place, where all the different parts of a motion event wind up showing up on the surface where they show up. So now we can discuss an issue of salience. There seems to be a general principle where if some concept shows up in the verb or satellite, it is relatively backgrounded there in attention. You can express it with relative backgrounding. Whereas if it's expressed in anything else, like a noun or a phrase or a clause, then, or a gerund of any sort, then it is ipso facto foregrounded. It's more called into attention. So languages, up to this point, we might have said, well, every language is simply equivalent in that in every case there's the universal phenomenon of what the semantic structure is of the motion event with its components and their particular relations, and every language simply has its own way or its own typological category for deploying those components, where to put them. But there is a difference. It turns out that whatever the way the language has for where it puts its component, whatever it puts in the verb or the satellite, that gets backgrounded. And you can't capture that in any other language, in a language that does it differently. So for example, if you contrast English with Spanish, English can, I forgot to say that the English satellite system has the capacity to include many different aspects of the path within a single satellite phrase. I think there's a satellite phrase. So for example, you can have up to 4 satellites in English. So let's say there's a child who's built a tree house up in a tree, and the parent of the child wants the child to come down. The parent can say to the child, "Come right back down out from up in there." Okay, so here's the English sentence. It's "come right back down out." And you have this crescendo of stress, all those 4 satellites, right back down out. And then you suddenly lower your voice to say, "from up in there." And so the "from," and then the "up in there" is just acting like a noun. So come right back down out from up in there. So in this case, we've expressed 3 separate kinds of right means immediately. I don't know if it's a satellite, but it's sort of acting like one. Back means a return trip. Down means descent. Out means exit. So try and do that in Spanish. You can't. If you want to say something like he ran back down into the cellar, Spanish has to pick one of those three path notions for its verb, and that's all it can do. Then it's done. So you can say, instead of he ran back down to the cellar, you can say he returned to the cellar. Volvió al sótano corriendo. So he returned to the cellar running. So you can background the return trip, but then what are you going to do with the fact that it's down and in? If you tried to say it, it's probably very awkward, but if you tried to say it, it would be highly foregrounded, called attention to. Or you could have picked the man ran back down into the cellar. You could say, el hombre bajó corriendo al sótano. Well, okay, now you have the man descended to the cellar running, corresponding to English down, but now what are you going to do about the back part and the in part? Yes, you could add a phrase like de nuevo, or otra vez, something meaning again, or but then you've highly foregrounded the fact that it's a return, and so forth. So you get the idea that because of the setup of what is placed where, languages genuinely differ as to what and how much they can express in a backgrounded way without calling much attention to it. And Atsugewi outdoes English in this respect. So in this sampling is the master of being able to background information without calling attention to it. So for example, if you take the sentence, which I gave earlier, literally, you've got stuck, meaning it's icky material moved, that's the stuck part. Itsta is into liquid, chua as a result of the wind blowing on it. For each of these, you could put a noun phrase out front. Like you could say, bithor is the noun for guts. You could say, bithor, what would you say? Che, bithor che, itsta. So there you put the guts. Or you could put, say, jumewe into the creek. Jumewe itsta. Into the creek. It's equally blue, but you don't need these nouns. That if you included them, you would foreground them. The verb parts themselves represent the same concept, but in a backgrounded way. Now, if English were to try and equal the informational content, we would necessarily foreground some of these concepts. So if English tried to equal the informational content in the generically, you would have to say something like, something icky blew into something liquid. Well, now you've really foregrounded the icky and the liquid. Or if you wanted to instantiate it, you could say something like, guts blew into the creek. But now you've foregrounded guts and creek by virtue of there being nouns. If, however, you wanted to equal the backgrounded flavor of the Atsugewi sentence, then you'd probably have to use a sentence like English, it blew in. But now you have to drop all the informational specificity that the it is something icky and the in is something liquid. So there's this trade-off between backgroundedness and informativeness. Okay, I think I'm going to conclude with, I've basically gone through the whole theoretical part. I'm returning now to the English type of co-event conflation, because the co-event conflation is, in these languages, and in English-type languages, is enormously elaborated. And maybe Chinese does it to some extent as well. And I'm just picking the fourth thing out of a set of things that are kinds of elaborations that show up in English type languages that, again, Spanish type languages can't hope to do. And now here's the particular thing at issue here is, what is the temporal and what is the relation between the verb and the satellite? You may remember that the satellite is arising from the main verb event, like, you know, what do I want? The rock rolled down the hill. So down the hill is from the main thing. Then you might have, with the cause of, a gust of wind blew on it. So the rock moved down the hill from a gust of wind, so the rock blew down the hill. Well, the verb comes from this, the verb in the normal sentence comes from this outlying co-event, whereas the preposition-y thing comes from the main event. So it's almost as if it were reversed from what you might expect. Okay, so what are the relationships? Well, if we go in temporal sequence, the first one is going to be precursion. This is where the co-event occurs way before, or before the event of the verb. The co-event, which shows up in the verb, occurs before the main motion event, which shows up, which is reflected in the preposition. An example would be glass splintered over the rug. So this comes from the glass moved over the rug with the precursion of the glass splintered. So first the glass splinters, then it moves down onto the rug. So, in fact, that's the reason it's moving down onto the rug, probably, is because it's splintered. So, this is the first kind of relationship that can show up between them, is precursion. That's a non-agentive example. An agentive example would be, let's say, the scientist ground the seeds into the test tube. So here's the test tube, grinding seeds. As you grind, they fall into the test tube. Well, the grinding precedes the falling into the test tube. So this is scientist caused to moved the seeds into the test tube. That's the main motion event. With the precursion of he ground the seeds. So the grinding which shows up in the verb occurs before the motion event. Next is enablement. In enablement, the verbal part, the co-event, occurs immediately before the motion event and enables it. Without it, the motion event could not have occurred. If I say to you, could you reach me that bottle down off the shelf? Or could you grab me that bottle down off the shelf? Where that comes from is, could you move the bottle down off the shelf with the enablement of having first reached to it? So here's the bottle on the shelf. It means could you please reach to the bottle, the shelf, and having grabbed it, move it down off the shelf. So, what's the verb that shows up in the sentence? It's reach. Could you reach me that bottle down off the shelf? So it means, could you move that bottle down off the shelf with the precursion of having first reached to it. With grab, it's the same. Could you grab me that bottle down off the shelf? Could you move it down off the shelf having first grabbed it? Okay, that's enablement. Next temporal, and we're getting closer, is cause. And there's like onset causation. So the tent moved down into the gully with the cause of, and this is onset causation instead of extended, a gust of wind blew on it. So the tent blew down into the gully from a gust of wind. we've had this type already. Agentive is batted the puck across the ice, off across the ice. So means I caused the puck moved across the ice with the onset cause of I batted it, or batted the puck, then the puck moves. So I batted the puck off across the ice. With continued extended causation, so now it's actually concurrent. The two time things are concurrent. Water boiled down to the midline of the pot. So here's the pot. Starts off with the water at the top. The water moved down to the midline of the pot with the extended cause of the water was boiling. That's what caused it to move down to the midline of the pot. And again, you take boil and you get the water boiled down to the midline of the pot. With an agent, you could say I squeezed the toothpaste out of the tube, I guess, or however, that's extended causation. Then we've got manner, which we've seen many examples of. The top spun past the lamp means the top moved past the lamp with the manner of the top was spinning. Whatever examples, these are again concurrent. Then another concurrent type is what I call concomitant, which is where the co-event is not a manner that the figure itself, that's involved in the figure's motion. It's independent of the figure's motion. Nevertheless, it's something that the figure it's an activity that the figure is manifesting concurrently with its motion. So one example is she wore a green dress to the party. This comes from she went to the party with the concomitance of she wore a green dress. They're unrelated events. Wearing a green dress doesn't abet going to the party. But nevertheless, you can conflate them in English. She wore a green dress to the party. Similarly, concomitance is not that well expressed in English. It's very easily expressed in Atsugewi. So another example is he whistled past the graveyard. Means he walked past the graveyard with the concomitance of he was whistling. It means as he walked past the graveyard, he whistled. He was whistling as he walked past it. Next is, what do I call it? Concurrent result. Must be a better name for that, but anyway. It's for sentences like, the door slammed shut. Well, here's the doorway, here's the door slammed shut. Shut is the path satellite. It tells you what happened. Well, what's slam? Well, slam is what happens at the very end point of the path event, of the path portion. Then it's slammed. So that's why I'm calling it concurrent result. It's the result, but it's otherwise concurrent with the path. So the co-event, the part about slamming, is now at the very terminal edge of the prepositionally indicated path. Another example of it is the rocket splashed into the water. It means as it entered the water, the rocket moved into the water with the concomitant result, with the concurrent result of that the water splashed. So it's the exact entry point of it. Finally, consequence, where the co-event actually occurs, as represented by the verb, actually occurs after the prepositional event, the motion event, the path. An example is if I'm in an office building, I'm on the 10th floor, you're on the 5th floor, and I'm going to go down to lunch. I can call you on the phone and I'll say, I'll stop down at your office on my way out of the building. I say, stop down at your office. That means I'll go down to your office, and then stop at it. So the stopping, which is the co-event, and shows up in the verb, stopping at, shows up, it follows the event of going down. So it's I'll stop down at. So first you go down, then you stop. That's unlike anything we've had so far. Similarly, I'll look in at the stew on the stove to see if it's okay. So I'll look in at means I'll go in and then look. So the looking follows the going in. Similarly, they locked the prisoner into his cell. Here's the cell. Here's the guards. They take the prisoner, put him in a cell, and only after he's in the cell do they then lock the door. So they locked him in. They locked him into a cell. In fact, English distinguishes. They locked him into a cell and they locked him in a cell. Into means first they put him in, then they lock. They locked him in a cell. Doesn't matter. He could have already just been there, and with the door open, then they just lock him in a cell. So it's a distinction. The into one is one of these consequence ones. So I think I should stop there. Just to summarize, the whole issue here has been there is a conceptual domain. In this case, I've worked on the domain of a motion event. And if you look at if you take a conceptual domain, some of them are universal. All languages do them the same. That's the way all my preceding talks have been about. Today's talk has been about a conceptual domain, which languages systematically do in certain different ways, where they represent the elements of this conceptual domain in a systematic way. Furthermore, each language can be amazingly consistent in its pattern for how it selects to place these elements of the universal domain in surface sentences. It can be very thoroughgoing in covering a wide range of semantic types and metaphoric extensions of these types. Third, I've tried to, like when I went into how Atsugewi expresses different kinds of into, one of the lessons from this kind of cross-comparison work is how utterly different languages can subdivide the world. It's the original kind of Worfian observation. How differently they can subdivide the world, and anything that you might have thought to yourself, this must be universal, because my language does it, and English does it, and Turkish does it. Well, there may be some language in the world that does it quite differently, and that's why you really need to look at a lot of different languages, especially the more exotic ones, less familiar ones, to see how human cognition, what it's capable of. Okay, that's fine.